asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Today we are going to discuss Vedanta and neuroscience. Some aspects of neuroscience where yoga and Vedanta are contributing substantially. And this is the way we sort of combine the first person and third person perspectives so as to get a very solid chunk of knowledge. You know, you must have heard of the term neurophenomenology. Just today morning she was in the conference where I spoke. So we were discussing all these things, that how do we combine the first person and third person perspectives in order to get all possible knowledge on matters like mind management, consciousness, the brain science, how does it work, how does it function, the perceptive process, what is at the heart of it. We already studied some of this in these classes. See, basically it is analyzing human experience, how does it happen. Now, at the heart of any experience, you take any of your experiences. Let us just think about a few things. Think of a beautiful sunset. You are watching it. It produces such a calm state of mind. Think of a beautiful flower which simply moves you, which is red in color, bright. Any of these experiences, and think of the crispiness of French fries which you all like. Now you see, these are all experiences with you, right? Even when you imagine it, it is with a considerable investment of vital energy. It appears like an enlivened something to you. So they are, what exactly is the cause for experiences, what we have been studying. And you know the process which science tells you, it comes up to the functioning of the human brain, where the entire electromagnetic signal is falling on your the brain cortex, and the neurochemical reactions are happening, and somehow you happen to get a complete image or an experience of the thing which you are perceiving. Now to this, Yoga Vedanta is in addition adding that mind has suffered a modification due to that object, because you are taking in through multiple senses the experience of the object, further modification. Mind is always in a state of flux, and then consciousness is illumining the vritti in the mind due to that perception, and thus you are coming to know what that object is through a process of recognition. Many times you say, oh, this is that particular flower, you are able to recognize it. So this is how the perception is taking place. Few points which you should note here is mindfulness absolutely necessary, awareness absolutely necessary, otherwise you are not going to experience perception, you are not going to experience anything out of it. You may hold something in your memory, but if you are not experiencing it, what is the point? Life is about experience, isn't it? Now, what exactly is happening in your brain? This is also something which we should study a bit at least. See, simple electromagnetic radiation getting converted into an experience in your system. What is the brain doing all along these processes? We will go a little into the neuroscience of it. See, your brain has specialized neural cells called neurons. Yes, all of you have studied something of this in school days. And they have a number of, they create a dendritic tree which you call learning. There are axons, root-like connections called axons add on, and then at locations called synapses, and the whole, an entire network, an assembly of interconnected neuronal activity is going on at any point in your brain. This is the picture of your learning mechanism. I can show you a picture of it so that you understand better neurophysiologically how complex the process is. But it appears something easy for you because you are seeing it from the first person perspective. But neurophysiologically, please see, those matrix like assemblies there are your, that is what you call learning, the neural networks which your neurons have made, and a single neuron looks like that. So, the neuronal activity in your brain, what does it do? It creates the neural pathways which are part of your learning process, and this has given us what is called evolutionary priority, the evolutionary edge, that you are able to consciously create the kind of neural pathways you want. There is a self interconnecting the entire process. This may appear strange to you, a self connecting the entire process. What I mean to say is, the learning, the network that is getting created there is experienced by you further on due to the presence of your awareness. So, awareness is participatory, in the sense your mental awareness is invested in your thought process, in your learning mechanism. So, due to this entire process, you are perceiving, you are knowing, you are thinking, you are having memory, you are having metacognitions, you are able to do everything. The difference between you and Sophia is this much only: she is not experiencing anything. She is working and she can do very wonderful tasks, like even play a game of chess with you and win. You know Sophia? Huh? And yeah, and she can do almost everything that you can do, but based on a program, based on her software. And she can even do decisions, make decisions based on the past programming that has been put into her. So, everything she can do, only thing is she has no sense of herself, she has no self-awareness, she is not experiencing anything, she is just performing tasks as per your program. So, this is the difference between the human experience and an inanimate object performing tasks for you, the difference between you and a robot. Now, once you see this for yourself, you will understand self-awareness is the essential thing, the essential fact about the human experience, which gives you the evolutionary edge. You evolve as you become more and more self-aware. The simple process of self-awareness has given you this experience of life. Suppose you augmented that awareness, it will give you a bigger slice of life, isn't it? You see, conscious experiences, because you are having conscious experiences, life is so wonderful. Suppose you augmented that level of consciousness, awareness, basic mental awareness, you will have a bigger experience of life. So, this is exactly what yoga aims at doing. By actually changing your, enhancing or augmenting your awareness, what is it trying to do? It making you more alive from within, which is giving you a totally different perception of life, different experiences of life. So, this entire process has been studied in a wonderful way. Today morning we were also discussing the techniques of yoga. The speciality of these sciences which developed here are, they consider awareness to be essentially apart from mind function also. The investiture has come in the form of reflected awareness in the mind, but essentially what we are calling consciousness, pure consciousness, is behind the mind. It is illumining the mind from behind, and so the mind appears conscious. So, conscious experience, tracking its foundation, its very base, is the essential research in yoga and Vedanta. Before it gets invested into the thought process, how does it remain? How can you turn it back upon itself? And how can you enhance it, augment it, so as to increase your experience, the level of your experience? So, these are all the things which we were discussing and working upon. Now, here I would like to give you 10 characteristics of, special characteristics you can say, specially it is available to the human experience, all these characteristics of the human brain, where neurology, neurophysiology contributes immensely in our understanding of these processes, as well as Yoga Vedanta. So, you see, combining subjective and objective sciences gives you enormous knowledge. This is a particular area where you can take from both the streams. We will study one by one these processes. You see, the simple fact of deliberation. Just let me introduce you to these neurophysiological characteristics of the human brain. The very first one which we will study is deliberation, then intuition, then metacognition, social cognition, mirroring and emotional contagion, memory salience, reward circuitry, in-group versus out-group bias, mindfulness and self-awareness. These are unique characteristics of the human brain. Don't think any other brain is deliberating the way you do, or has intuitions the way you do, or has all these characteristics the way you do. So, since they are unique to the human brain, what does neuroscience say about them, how it is happening? Because they will give you the third person perspective, and Yoga Vedanta will give you the first person perspective. So, you can amass a huge amount of knowledge on the working of your brain and the phenomenon of experience, which is so unique to the human mind. So, we will try to understand it in both ways. Let us take up the very first thing, which is deliberation. What is deliberation? To deliberate upon something means to cogitate, to think about something deeply, to apply rational conscious thought to something. Now, this is a huge network in the human brain. How exactly the thought process takes place? What is its difference from intuition? How is it different from intuition? Intuition, आपने सुना है ना, the term? It means knowing something by insight without deliberation. So, these two have to be studied together. You are just knowing without deliberating, as an insight, without the use of conscious, without the use of rational thought even. So, how are you able to do this? These are supposed to be, from the neurophysiological standpoint, these are two separate networks in the human brain. If you take fMRI scans of these processes, you will find there are two separate networks, and intuition especially is used so much in both science and these mystical traditions like Yoga Vedanta, that more attention today is focused on this aspect. You see, where exactly does it occur according to neurophysiology? It occurs, intuition I am speaking of, it occurs in the amygdala, anterior insula, ventral, occipitotemporal regions and the median OFC, that is the orbitofrontal cortex of the brain. This is whenever there is an episode of intuition, an intuitive awareness about something. These are the areas which get where the neurons are firing. Now, the intuitive process itself, it is a real miracle. How does it happen without even giving enough thought, without giving thought to something? You know, some of the greatest discoveries of science have come by intuition. If you study the history of science, and of course mystical traditions rely heavily on these intuitions. Every mystical tradition will give you a method. Yoga essentially gives you methods, but it will finally say that intuitively, the experience itself is intuitive. Vedanta will, that is why say it is a mystical experience. So, through a process of deliberation, you can come to a point where you have a flashing intuition. That is the point. So, since both of these, an unsolicited insight as it were, undeliberated insight, since you arrive at this point, what is happening in neurophysiology is fully they are not able to explain these pathways of intuition. The study is going on still. A lot of research is going on this, because this is a very important point for both the scientists and the mystics. In yoga and Vedanta, you have certain wonderful observations which I would like to tell you. See, it is a matter of which has intrigued both philosophers and scientists, but where yoga has to contribute here is, it will tell you the gap that you feel when you are analyzing experience. It is because you have not understood the connection between this hardware and software. The brain functions like a hardware, I told you. What is happening correspondingly in the mind, that is little understood. So, some kind of a penetrative insight, that is why you need a foothold outside the normal processes of the mind and the brain. Many scientists have commented on this, you know, and I told you about George Wall's statement. He said that to solve the major mysteries of science, you need a foothold outside science. You need a foothold in the infinite actually to throw light on this. So, this comes only by the power of intuition, how exactly it is taking place. Even in the great mystical traditions of both the East and the West, they are giving you analytical tools as well as pointing out to the fact that the ultimate experience is intuitive, it is mystical. You just arrive at the truth directly without a process even. I discussed one or two of the deliberate analytical tools with you initially. Do you remember? Like for example, you have a sense of I persisting all the time, although your body and mind has changed immensely. Right from the time you are born, the sense of I-ness remains with us, the same I, although everything about us has changed. Now this is an analytical tool to help you understand there is a continuum running through you. Consciousness is the continuum. Even mind activity is fragmented, isn't it? But consciousness is always a continuum. Now this is if you analyze this, how this experience takes place, you will come to this understanding. But if you still are asking for the experience of it, some people come to the insight through the deliberation directly. But if you are still asking for an experience, then you have to build up your intuition. This is what they will tell you through some form of yogic method which is given. So like this, a number of analytical tools are available in our scriptures. One more thing which I told you, you are aware of your body, the movements of your hands, the movements of your face, but the body is not aware of you, which means awareness belongs to the subject which is functioning apart from the body. This is a powerful analytical tool to help you understand that you are indeed somebody who is functioning through this instrumentation. But to bring you to the experience of the self, again you need a tremendous intuition to come into this understanding. So you can combine these two networks. That is why from the Yoga Vedanta standpoint, they are not two separate networks. They complement each other and they will help each other. If you develop your analytical tools, at some point there will be a flashing intuition into the heart of reality. So this is something we can understand from both the neuroscientific and Yoga Vedanta standpoints regarding deliberation and intuition. Let us take up the next one, which is metacognition. What is metacognition? It is thinking about your thinking. And you don't just think linearly, in metacognition, you think from all possible angles. You take all perspectives, motivations, assumptions, possible biases into consideration, and you are thinking. Now, neurophysiologically, this is explained as, it is like a, you can say, network of regions in your brain working in concert. Due to this is happening, and in a way, in certain areas of your brain, information itself is processed hierarchically. So one part of your brain is in a way acknowledging what the other part of the brain is doing. Yoga Vedanta will add something more to this. It will say, the very fact that you can metacognize or have memory shows that there is an underlying reality to the two streams of thought. There is an underlying substratum. Otherwise, how do you know? How do you metacognize? How will you have memory? So it is indirectly pointing to the fact of awareness being present. That is why you are able to do these functions. That is why the brain is able to. Are you getting the point? Metacognition, thinking about thinking, unless there is a common factor to the two streams of thought, how can it be possible? This is what they are pointing out to. And something more they will add to this. How do you know you are thinking about your thinking? The fact of metacognition. Somewhere there is a detached observer thinking about what you had been thinking. So, however you explain it, you have to understand that at the heart of any form of perception or thought is awareness. According to Vedanta, even they analyze the state of Sushupti in order to derive a tremendous possibility. Why are they analyzing the state of deep sleep? What will they tell you? See, in that state of deep sleep, the mind shuts down. And that is why you are not experiencing objects, but some level of experience you have. You are experiencing the absence of objects, isn't it? And you have the experience of deep restfulness. So it is still an experience, and you have been present. So it is not an inference. It is not a metacognition. It is an experience. It is an experience of absence. It is not an absence of experience. That is why it is not an inference. The entity who would later infer has experienced the absence of objects and has experienced a deep state of restfulness. That is why the study of Sushupti is so important in Vedanta. It is pointing to something far more fundamental to your thought activity, isn't it? So, that is how you see you can combine subjective and objective sciences in studying any single activity of your brain. They have more and more insights to throw. Let us go to the next one, what is called social cognition. This is a very important aspect of you, because whether you like it or not, you know, your social cognitions build your self, the ego complex. You are perceiving yourself as you are being perceived. This is your sense of yourself usually. To an uninvestigated mind, this is the only sense of itself which it will have. What others think of me is what I am. So, the social cognition aspect of the human brain is very important. This is supposed to be the default network of the human brain. You know, always it is very sensitive to social cognition, and social relationships, that is why, play a huge role here. Social knowledge itself is processed very differently compared to non-social knowledge in the human brain. See, this is an important neurophysiological point which you should understand. So, what is the meaning of social knowledge? Like, for example, how I am perceived by my friend, how much my friend loves me, is more important to you than how do I find my way to IIT using the GPS, because there the I sense is not directly involved, but in a process of social knowledge it is involved. Are you getting the point? See, social knowledge means basically your ego, how is it being yourself, how you are being perceived by others. Now, this holds dominance over your mind. This is your actual sense of self. I am repeating the thing because you must catch the point exactly. Now, this holds such dominance over your brain that non-social knowledge, like finding your way somewhere or some information, the mathematics that you do, physical laws which you understand, all this becomes secondary compared to my social cognition. This is how your brain takes it. So, why even social pain, you know, suppose you suffer an embarrassment or somebody insults you, that is equivalent in neurochemical intensity to actual pain of getting beaten or getting tortured. It is equivalent in neurochemical intensity to that. Why? This is the way your brain takes it. That is why social cognition is such an important aspect of you. It is important to understand it. Now, Yoga Vedanta also understands the validity of this, because as long as the self is not recognized, you are functioning as an ego. The ego complex is very active and it is built on social cognition. So, understanding this, it survives on networking. That is why mental networking, your concept of yourself is what others are thinking about you. This is the normal uninvestigated mind's condition. So, since ego is part of the Sukshma Sharir and mind is one huge network, the concept of social cognition is held very important even in Yoga Vedanta, in the sense this ego has to mature into knowledge about itself. So, having a mature ego which understands its masks, its ways of working is important in these mind sciences also. If it is a very immature ego, it will keep reacting to outer circumstances without trying to understand itself. So, social cognition is a valid stand which both these disciplines analyze in a deep way. Your sense of yourself, why should it be determined by others? Because you have no sense of yourself from your own first person standpoint. This is what ultimately yoga will point out to. So, to get this sense, at least some amount of yoga requires to be practiced, so that you are independent of the opinions of others about you. This becomes important in social relationships, tomorrow in your workplace. All these things will become important, because really I am telling you, if you cannot control your mind at a particular level, even a single wrong word or a single critical remark about you can simply put you down, isn't it? So, all these things can work ferociously over you if you do not have this inner sense of detachment and if you do not understand this concept properly. So, this is important again to both the disciplines. There is ongoing research on all of this. I am just giving you currently how they are thinking about it. Then we have this very important concept of mirroring and emotional contagion. This is a very important concept, you must pay attention to it. Let me first show you a slide. You see, mirror neurons are specialized brain cells in the premotor cortex, which are seen to fire during goal oriented actions as well as the observation of similar actions, which means if you are seeing something, it is equivalent to doing it, performing it. That is the effect from the neurophysiological standpoint. Seeing is doing, you are experiencing the actual thing. Look at this, this is actually the neurological basis of empathy, imitation, all this. You see a small baby, look at the picture there, it will simply imitate what the other person is doing because the mirror neurons in its brain are actually catching that emotion and it will mirror it perfectly without any training, without thinking. This is the capacity of mirror neurons in the brain. What the implications of this are, response is similar for performing the action, witnessing the action and hearing about the action. And that is how mirror neurons enable empathy, skill building through mimicry as well as vicarious experiences. Some more information let me give you on this. See, observation of an action due to the presence of mirror neurons automatically triggers its simulation. Thus, mirror neurons provide a neural basis for all empathetic processes. The mirror neuron system is active when a person performs an action as well as when he only witnesses an action being performed. In essence, this mirror neuron system explains why a person may wince when he sees another person being beaten. You have experienced this? Somebody is suffering something, but you also feel very shaken. You saw a very beautiful scene in a movie, you feel a happy state of mind. In fact, the fact why you have gone to a movie is to experience the emotions going on there. So, it is due to the activity of your mirror neurons. It explains empathy actually. And so, from the neurophysiological standpoint, perception is actually performance, isn't it? From the neurophysiological standpoint, you are experiencing the thing neurophysiologically. So, that is why they say emotional contagion is so very important. Emotions are contagious, they are influential, and there is a literal correspondence between the brain processes occurring in different individuals via mirror neurons. There is an actual correspondence. Somebody feels very bad somewhere, it will affect you in some way due to this mirror neuron effect. So, now this mirror neurons have been deeply understood in yoga psychology also. They have not given them the term mirror neurons, but the importance of, I always told you, the senses, the intake through the senses decides the nature of your mind. It will decide the content of your mind. Why? You will mirror what you have been seeing. After some time it becomes part of your being. So, this is based on, you see, you have the perfect neurophysiological correlate for this aspect of your being, this aspect of your experience through the mirror neurons. That is why careful ways of living. You can either use your mind as a gold mine, you can make it a gold mine, or you can make it a dustbin. You can make it anything. In our culture, there have been a number of stories on this. You see, let me tell you a story here for you to understand. If you keep focused on right things, you will actually become like that. There was a prince whose father had a huge kingdom, and this prince was growing up, he will become the next king. The only problem with this prince was he was physically very weak. very, very weak. He looked like a small boy and no energy and very thin and not putting up weight, and nobody could find out what is the problem with him. They tried all sorts of Ayurveda and whatever was available, but nothing worked on him. So the king was very worried. How will this boy manage this kingdom tomorrow if his health remains like this? So he called all the courtiers, he called meetings of the doctors available at that time, all that. And then one wise courtier advised him, you see, you just make a huge image of Hanumanji and put it in his room. So after 1 month or so, huge idol of Hanumanji was put in that child's room, in the prince's room, and every day, because he was already of a devotional nature, he would see and he would, that the impact of that image on his mind, you see that well developed muscular body and absolutely strong biceps and the look of confidence and devotion on the face, all this affected his mind so much that within a month's time, after this his health started improving. His health became better and better because he looked upon him as the ideal. The impact on the mind becomes such by your exposures, by whatever you, that is why, you know, role models become very important. They actually change your neural chemistry, and through the mirror neuron effect, they will change your behavior. What do you take as your role models? What do you adore and value in life? It is, tomorrow you are going to be like that. So all this becomes very important due to this mirror neuron mechanism of the human brain. This is so widely spread, and the boy actually developed the characteristics of great physical strength. He developed a wonderful body, a strong mind. So he became like his ideal. That is why it is always said that keep a high ideal in front of you and you will become like that. Now in Yoga Vedanta, you know, this has been a common experience with all mystics, that they feel themselves to be in others. They feel this in a very deep way, because awareness is not limited to the borders I have set. It is not limited to my skin. Things are outside my skin, but they are not outside my awareness. So when you come alive to that awareness, when it becomes a fact and a reality for you, you perceive the other person as me in another form, the same awareness functioning through another body and mind. This is how you perceive it. So they feel a deep sense of interconnectedness and unity with all of creation. You know, this is an actual fact and experience in the life of mystics. Once, let me tell you this incident. You know, Vivekananda was in his monastery in Belur, and he was in his room. In the room next to his was another brother disciple called Vijnananand. And Vivekananda, it so happened Vijnananand got up around 2 o'clock that night, and he came out into the portico. He saw Vivekananda also pacing there, and he asked Swamiji that why you didn't sleep. And Swamiji said, I could not sleep. I was sleeping well when I got a sudden shock and I woke up. I am sure that something very devastating has happened somewhere, and somehow my mind caught it. And that time they did not understand it, and Vijnanji thought it's just maybe some dream or something like that. But next day the papers carried the news that there was a big volcanic eruption in Fiji, and a whole lot of people had suffered and been killed and all sorts of problems and injuries, and that had happened exactly at the time when Vivekananda had woken up in shock. So in some way the mind can relate with every other mind in a mystical way. You see, from the brain standpoint, it mirrors the actual experience of others. This is really the heart of the explanation to empathy. What does empathy mean? Putting yourself into the shoes of others. You are feeling the experience of the other person as if it was your experience. Unless empathy is there, you cannot actually go out and work for others. You cannot feel for others the way a great person feels. It is only due to empathy. So that is based on mirror neurons. The explanation for empathy is the mirror neuron mechanism of the human brain. You are actually experiencing the pain or the whatever, the hurt, and so you can stand up and work for it. Now, let us go to the next piece of information. You see, the next point there here is memory salience. What remains salient in your memory? Can you tell me? What is it that you remember basically? Neurophysiology will tell you that it is emotionally laden information which has the greatest memory salience in terms of both significance for you as well as retrieval. Emotionally laden information, anything, if there is the emotional aspect, if emotion is added to it, you remember it very well. Now, these processes have been studied in a very big way, because once upon a time we did discuss memory, isn't it? In one of the sessions we discussed memory in a deep way. You have two types of memory, long term, short term, and then you have declarative and non-declarative memories. Declarative memories are what are consciously accessible, like for example episodic and semantic memories. Episodic memories are autobiographical in nature, snapshots of your personal past, and semantic memories are facts about you and about others which may not be autobiographical even. So, these memories are consciously accessible, and that is why they hold memory salience. In your mind, these are the things which will dominate. Even if you have a whole lot of information in your mind, what are the things which will dominate? They are telling you something very important. Please try to understand this point. What is it that is going to dominate your mental field? Memory salience is going to. What are the factors for memory salience? Yes, emotions. So, these will always remain salient in your mind, and especially the episodic and semantic memory systems. These two types of memory will always be salient. Now, how does Yoga Vedanta see memory? As recycled conscious thought. We have discussed this earlier. You take in something, becomes a vritti, goes to the subconscious, becomes sanskar, comes out as memory. Now, memory is not just, most of your thought is memory, not just that, memory is so very significant for you because it is in the form of remembrance of a past event. It points to something very deep. If you in the present are able to remember a past event, again there is a common factor between the two events. The common factor is you, the awareness. This is there in the Brahma Sutras. The immutability of the cognizer of memory is fact that awareness underlies the entire thought process. So, if you think deeply and see, this is indeed a fact. What more does it tell you about memory? Yoga gives you this very important equation that because your mental awareness is dominated by memory, you do not feel it. So, in a way, if you want to feel awareness through the process of yoga, you must separate it from memory. You must extract it from the clutches of memory. That is why stop thought. Try to practice it in some way so that you are able to access the foundation of the thinking process. Try to find an insight into that. So, this is the normal process given. These are all the important points about memory which only the yogic sciences can point out to, because they have invented techniques to take you there. They are not just giving you ideas, they are actually giving you techniques. How to get there? There is a process, do it this way. Today morning also we were discussing the techniques. So, memory salience is an important subject of study for both Vedanta and neuroscience. This is how they are studying it. Then we have this reward circuitry of the human brain, which is another tremendous thing. You know, your brain is has evolved to minimize danger and maximize reward. There are circuits which are actually called dopaminergic circuits, which are based on the release of dopamine, which is an important neurotransmitter. In fact, it is the physical correlate of the sense of pleasure that you feel. The feel good experience, the physical correlate, neurophysical correlate is called dopamine. Now, there are these circuits which decide, it is actually this neurotransmitter which decides your preferred courses of action, the choices you will make, and the lessons you have learned, the beliefs you hold. To many people, you see, the unexplored, uninvestigated mind will fall for all this. It will, your choice of things will be decided by this dopaminergic circuit only. How much pleasure does it give me? That is its value. So, this is how the brain by itself will function. So, what Yoga Vedanta has to add to this is, the conscious mind has this capacity to stop this circuitry, to create a value system where you are not given to follow this circuit. See, I told you the difference between Shreyas and Preyas, isn't it? The good and the pleasurable, the preferable and the pleasurable. Many times when making a choice, this will be the essential choice you need to make. Now, if you have not explored the inner dimensions of your being, you can always fall for what is immediately pleasurable with consequent reactions later on. But if you are trained in yoga, immediately you will see it for what it is. So, this dopaminergic circuit does not have its hold over you. This reward circuitry, Yoga Vedanta will say, has to be broken for you to make the right decisions. Otherwise, you are only going by the reward. And that is why in scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita, they will tell you, drop the necessity, the intention, the feel for the reward itself. If you want to live a value based life and make the right choices, right decisions in your life, build your life, evolve your life, you must stop expectation at this level. One little thing giving me a bit of pleasure for a few seconds, should I compromise my values over that thing? This is where Yoga Vedanta is invaluable. It will tell you, never compromise values for emotions. You can break this entire circuitry and remain independent of it. This is the great thing about which we should understand about. That is why non-expectation, Bhagavad Gita expresses it very openly. Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Don't expect results from what actions you perform. Why? Otherwise, you will fall into this circuitry and it is addictive. It will only make you chase pleasure, not what is good. Now, this basic knowledge we are not giving our youngsters. So, after a lot of trial and error, you come back to this understanding. But basically, if you understand this, you see, neurochemistry, neurophysiology can only give you what is happening in your brain. Yoga Vedanta will give you, as a result of what is happening in your brain, how is your mind functioning, how is your awareness getting blocked or getting revealed, how is it affecting your human experience, so what you should do about it. This entire knowledge comes from this. A value system can be created out of this. We leave it to you to create your values, but essentially you must understand the mechanisms, how they are functioning. There is a simple story which points out to this. Let me just tell you that story for 2-3 minutes. See, there was a king who was absolutely frustrated in being a king, because the responsibilities, the entire owners of the kingdom, the sense of stress he used to feel was enormous, because he is responsible for almost everything. He was a very sincere person, and he said that because I am the king, any kind of injustice taking place also I will suffer, it will be my karma, it will be my doing in some way, and so I do not want so many responsibilities at all. I do not want to be the king. But he was such an ideal king that nobody was prepared to allow him to go. So, one day what he did, he quietly called his guru and told him, see, I give this entire kingdom to you. You please take care of all the affairs of this kingdom. I will go away maybe to the neighboring kingdom, take up some small job there, and I will practice my Yoga Vedanta, my Dhyan and all this. My mind is in all this. I do not want to manage all this kingdom and all this. Then the Guru told him, okay, then in that case, the Guru understood his state of mind. So, he said, see, will you do one work for me? You can do this, I will take the responsibility of your kingdom, but this one work I want you to do. And the king said, what is it? He said, I will put you in the form of a trustee of this kingdom. You will run this kingdom for me, not for yourself. You are no more king. I am the king, you are my trustee. You know, trusteeship management is a very huge thing. Any company has no single owner. There will be a number of trustees and then shareholders, right? So, they are not owners, they are running the show, and neither is the capital invested in any single person. So, also if you take charge of something and work as a trustee there, you know, you will not get as stressed out as if you were in charge of the entire thing. You were the owner of the entire thing, it belonged to you, no such thing. So, understanding that work can be performed in this way without expectation, without identity coming in there, without attributing things to yourself, this is the non-expectation that Bhagavad Gita and all these scriptures speak of. When you function like that, what happens is these circuitry in your mind, the reward circuitry in your mind gets confused. It will not function in that way at all. It will function in the neural pathways which you create are those of non-expectation of reward. As a result, what will happen? Deep level detachment comes. You actually fashion your brain through your mind, I told you, isn't it? You can rewire your neural pathways through your mind, through your thoughts. So, if this basically we are able to digest that I do not function as the owner of something, I function in the form of as a service you are doing it, then it will not affect you in wrong ways, you will not get stressed out by it. So, this is a possibility. Non-expectation is a very huge virtue in our culture. So, basically it is hitting on this circuit. You understood this, no? So, you see the contribution Yoga Vedanta has to make to modern neuroscience. There is another one special bias which the human brain resorts to from time to time. It is called the in-group versus out-group bias. Wherever there is a community of people working, this kind of bias will be there. What does this bias say? You see, managers have a neurological propensity to discount information about themselves from outsiders in favor of information from close associates. We do this, all of us do this in our own way. Now, this bias is also based on a kind of circuit which your brain creates. It creates a circuitry out of the people you prefer, the in-group. This affects your decisions, this affects your very vision. So, again circuits like these have to be reoriented, rewired through thoughts. There should be no in-group, out-group as such. Knowledge is knowledge, and if at all you are listening to a preferred group, it should be a group which is positive, isn't it? There is no in-group, out-group about it, a group which is positive. Anybody who is giving you positive advice or good emotions, good thoughts, that is the person whom you can relate to without getting into unnecessary biases like this. Like this, there are many things which neuroscience has one particular outlook and Yoga Vedanta has an outlook which adds on to this. It can give you a total knowledge of the subject being studied. Now, the most important two skills of the brain which should be very high on actually the management development agenda are these last two skills, which are mindfulness and self-awareness. This is the basic unique capacity of the human mind which makes us what we are. What is mindfulness? Yes, you are aware of something, self-conscious about it, and you are doing a function through that self-awareness. If you are not mindful of something, if your mind is not there, your senses may be there, it does not matter. You are looking at something, but you are not seeing it because your mind is elsewhere. So, mindfulness, today we have a huge tradition of practicing mindfulness. You know, Vipassana techniques and all will give you so many techniques are there to help you become more and more mindful. If you become more and more mindful, essentially you are only augmenting awareness within you, so that you are able to distance yourself from thought processes, emotions, all this. So, mindfulness is very important. In fact, your success is decided to a great extent by this. Please know this. Even emotional intelligence requires a lot of mindfulness. Actually, we have substantial medical and psychological investigation on this, which tells you mindfulness is absolutely important. It is even important for physical health. If you are not awake from within, your very cells will become lazy, tamasic. So, to awaken them, first of all the mind must be in a state of high level alertness, high level aliveness. If you are very alive, now suppose just imagine and see, if you are double as alive as you are just now, if you became double as alive, how would be your experience of life? Double as beautiful as it is. So, that is why it is important to develop mindfulness. Then you have self-awareness, which is, you see, the essential processes of metacognition and all this, they are all possible because there is self-awareness in the human being. No, to pause about, when you are thinking, to pause a bit and think about what you are thinking is a uniquely human capacity. It is only possible due to self-awareness. So, the more this awareness is enhanced, you actually, you charge up your brain, as it were. It will function in a wonderful way for you if these basic things are well taken care of. What is the basic thing about the human mind? That fundamentally your thoughts are floating on awareness. That has to be brought into the forefront. Then only your psychological reality will not be prominent. The existential reality has come to the forefront. The essential you has come to the forefront, so the instrument of the mind can be handled very well. So, this is something which again and again the mind sciences, especially in the Eastern traditions, will keep telling you that there are ways to do this. Even Buddhism recommends a whole lot of techniques to arrive at this. Any mystical tradition, even in the West, works like Philokalia, the Way of the Pilgrim is a small book. All these books will give you this very special technique called the mind in the heart. It is actually a yogic technique. If you keep your attention at the heart center, awareness in a way is continuous. Awareness comes into full blossom. So, like this small techniques which may appear mystical, mystical does not mean mysterious. Mystical means something beyond the normal, which maybe you have not tried, so it is appearing mystical, but if you try it, it becomes natural. So, it is something like that. These techniques are like that. They are all meant to augment your levels of awareness, so that brain regulates its circuitry. Brain functions as you would have it function, and it affects the entire system. So, this is how you can augment the levels of human experience. Since we have already said at the heart of all human experience is consciousness, I would just like to tell you one basic thing about consciousness, and we will end today's session. It is this fact that science and Vedanta are seeing consciousness differently at the present moment. There are certain fundamental differences. I have been giving you the Yoga Vedanta perspective again and again. How is science, mainstream science, looking at consciousness? How is it studying consciousness? You can understand through this slide. See, these are the 4 major differences. I am not going to go into detail about them, but just you should know it as part of your curriculum here. What are the major differences between science and Vedanta on consciousness? First of all, science believes consciousness is an emergent property of the human brain. But Vedanta will tell you it is non-emergent. In fact, you are understanding the brain in your consciousness, through your consciousness. Then science will tell you there is the content of consciousness. It always means consciousness of something. Please understand this clearly so that confusion does not happen in the mind. That consciousness has content, thoughts, emotions, all of this. It is consciousness of your thought, consciousness of your emotion. This is how it is studying consciousness. That is why they call thought, will, emotion, all of this as consciousness in Western philosophy. But Vedanta is very, very clear that consciousness is essentially contentless. If it is of something, it is not yet pure consciousness. Mind activity is very far off from the state of pure consciousness. Even what you are calling enlivened mind activity is only due to the reflection of this consciousness in the mind. It is the reflected consciousness which is getting enmeshed with the thought activity in the mind, and so enlivening your thought. It is an appearance, that is all. So, this is another basic difference. Then science will tell you it is blank. It denotes a kind of blankness, this concept of the Atman or pure self. But Vedanta will tell you it is Purna, it is fullness in itself. And it is an object of study according to science. That is why you have this whole science of consciousness. But Vedanta will tell you consciousness is the eternal subject. Because it is the eternal subject, everything is objective to it, including your consciousness studies. So, these are some fundamental differences in how at present the two disciplines of science and Vedanta are seeing consciousness, which you should know. With this, I think we will finish today's session because time is up. Next session, you have asked about Gayatri Mantra, so we will take that up because next session is actually on the methodology, methods.
It will be on Friday.
Yeah, it will be on Friday, Friday same time, and we will take the Gayatri Mantra as one method to come to this understanding of Vedanta. Thank you.